Younger folks like to hear from the nonprofit much more often, but of course in shorter snippets. Think like Twitter, versus like baby boomers want longer, more comprehensive type updates and communication, but not as frequently.
I'm Rich Frazier.
And I'm Russ Fanoff.
Welcome to the Nonprofit Fundraising Exchange, a podcast from IPM Advancement.
We believe strong nonprofits can change the world, and our goal with each episode is to bring you insightful conversations with thought leaders from the nonprofit sector.
Let's dive in. Welcome, listeners, to the Nonprofit Fundraising Exchange. I'm Rich Frazier. Today, we're talking about the challenge of sustaining the donor's attention after the initial media spotlight on a crisis or other major event begins to fade. Russ, we commonly see donors rally to relief efforts, like, for instance, the earthquake in February that took place in Turkey and Syria.
That's right, Rich. You know, information nowadays spreads very quickly thanks to the internet, and that's made it easy for nonprofits to reach donors in times of need. They can also use social media in particular to spread the word about urgent disasters or crises. And this has been a tremendous aid to fundraisers over the past couple of decades, but it's also presented another challenge. How do you keep supporters engaged, many who are first-time donors to your nonprofit, after that initial connection?
To help answer that, we have two great guests on our panel today. Michelle Boggs is the Executive Nonprofit Industry Advisor of Classy, the nonprofit subsidiary of GoFundMe. Welcome to the podcast, Michelle.
Hi, well, thanks so much for having me. And Melissa, it's great to be with you.
Hey, I'm glad that you beat me to the punch. We are also welcome back to NPFX, Melissa Rutan, the Senior Associate Consumer Marketing and Fundraising at American Red Cross. She's been on the show before, and we're thrilled to have you back, Melissa.
Yeah, great to be back with you, Rich and Russ, and really excited for the conversation with you, Michelle, and just to share some best practices.
Great. Well, we're really excited to hear from both of you on this important topic. Before we start, would you please introduce yourselves to our listeners and describe your experience just briefly as it relates to this particular challenge of sustaining donor attention? Michelle, let's start with you.
Sure. And before I do that, I just wanted to quickly say I love your podcast. I especially loved a recent episode you had around overhauling your case for support. I think so many organizations don't want to do this, and they really need to. So I loved that, and think you all are just doing such great work.
Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you. Thanks for listening.
Yeah. I'm Classy's Executive Nonprofit Industry Advisor. I joined the team in October, and this is a first of its kind role for the organization. I've spent the last almost 20 years in nonprofit fundraising. So at Classy, I work with our go-to-market teams, sales, marketing, product, et cetera, to make sure that everything we build, everything we design and implement will make our customers as successful as possible. And you mentioned this, but Classy is a subsidiary of GoFundMe, and together we're a global giving platform that connects all the supporters out there that want to help with the causes they care about. And through technology, we're able to create exceptional giving experiences. And we get to combine the power of GoFundMe's community of 100 million people with the 6,000 nonprofits that Classy supports to really expand network and help everybody help more people. So together, both companies have engaged over 5 million individuals, raising over $25 billion for social good. And I think this topic especially really plays into both of these organizations and how you convert these episodic donors into lifelong supporters.
Awesome. We are so excited to have you. I'm excited in particular because I'm an annual giving nerd, and GoFundMe and this whole kind of move toward episodic giving is really exciting. And it's something that we deal with on a daily basis with our clients. And I'm really excited to hear your background and your feedback on it. And Melissa, welcome back.
Thank you. So as you mentioned, I work with the American Red Cross. I've been with the organization for a little bit over 5 years now. The organization has been around for a lot longer than that. For more than 140 years, we've been working to prevent and alleviate human suffering in the face of emergencies. whether that's a large natural disaster, a home fire, a blood emergency, or support for our military community. So we are very tried and true in disaster response. And also in my position, I really focus on the donor journey and what happens after that first donation. How is the donor interacting with the organization? And even beyond those rapid response disaster fundraising moments.
Thank you so much for being back here with us at the Nonprofit Fundraising Exchange. The clients that we deal with are really concerned about episodic giving and the way that it's changing donor behavior. And so I'm interested to hear from both of you. Do you think that, especially with younger generations of donors and people who are actively giving right now, do you think that this shift in charitable giving is moving more toward rapid response or episodic type giving than, say, we were maybe 20 years ago?
Absolutely. I think you and all of the nonprofits you work with should be thinking about this and should be thinking about the work that you do maybe a bit differently to stay competitive in what is such a noisy marketplace. Mm-hmm. We see lots of evidence that newsworthy events attract all types of donors, and people want to help, especially in times of crisis. What blew me away is when the Ukrainian war broke out a year ago, we just got a figure in the last couple of weeks that $275 million has been raised across both GoFundMe and Classy over the last year in support of the people of Ukraine. So that in itself tells you giving is certainly starting to trend that way. And like you mentioned, I would definitely say this is true in younger donors. Mm-hmm. And it's what you said about access and the internet, right? So like they're exposed to things that other generations weren't at their ages. So there's things that can't be unseen. They're more activated and they're more privy to what's happening in the world, and they want to help. Mm-hmm. Classy does a Why America Gives report every year. And in our most recent report, we found that millennial and Gen Z donors are almost 2 times as likely to be motivated to donate following one of these sudden news events or a crisis, more so than like your baby boomer generation.
Interesting.
These younger groups are also 2 times as likely to become aware of causes through the media and through friends and influencers and some of those other circles that they run in.
That's interesting.
Yeah. I would also add, they're going to look to coworkers and friends to get this information and see where they should give their gifts. And so, yeah, I would agree with this sentiment that it's certainly much more prevalent than it was, in the last decade.
Yeah, and I'll also add in there too, just thinking about it demographically, we know that there's kind of an hourglass shape to the demographics in the United States. And, you've got kind of a very small Gen X and then Gen Z and millennials make up a pretty big chunk of the population. And if they're being active on these platforms and they're having certain preferences in the way that they behave as donors, that's something that we all have to pay attention to.
Absolutely.
Thanks for sharing those statistics, Michelle. It's really interesting just to hear what is happening in the industry-wide across organizations and how really the news media and the buzz created around these events is really an opportunity for organizations to increase the awareness of their mission. And it's not the only way to increase awareness too. I find that oftentimes in non-disaster times is a really great way to be engaging with Gen Z or the younger populations. Especially we've done a lot on TikTok and just educational videos of what happens if there's a fire in your apartment, mm-hmm. or what happens if you're in a snowstorm, what do you need in your car? So I think not only being ready to respond when there is a disaster or large need highlighted, but having those relationships built with your audience year round is really critical so that then you do stand out during those moments.
Melissa, do you see those kind of messages to people in that non-crisis time as kind of a stewardship effort? Is that, where you're really trying to build a relationship that goes beyond that kind of episodic giving?
Yeah, so we call them engagements, right? So our mission is we're the American Red Cross, and so a lot of people are impacted by the mission in some way or another. Mm-hmm. They may have heard of the Red Cross through a disaster or through a family member who may have needed blood during their cancer treatment or during a hospital visit. And so really we see those as entryways for people to get to know the organization.
Mm-hmm.
And then as we engage them and cultivate them, they're just opened up to more of the Red Cross mission and world, and whether that's volunteer opportunities or things that they can actually get involved with locally in their communities.
So I want to ask about the initial messaging for rapid response fundraising. So when you want to get people to respond to an immediate need, how do you approach that sort of rapid response appeal differently than you would a typical fundraising appeal?
So I think a lot of times the difference between a rapid response appeal and an annual giving appeal is your annual campaign, it's a lot more pre-planned. You have a lot more time leading up to it to think of what creative you want to highlight, what language, what part of your mission, and you're really trying to create your own urgency around the mission and your own compelling story. A lot of times with rapid response fundraising, the urgency is already there, whether that's from the news or just people being aware of the situation. So you don't really have to make as strong of a case for support. It's more getting the ask in front of your donors and giving them the opportunity to give. So we find a lot of times, especially with natural disasters, sometimes it's going to hit, whether that's a hurricane, you usually get a little bit of a warning that a hurricane's coming, versus an earthquake or a tornado, the lead up time is a lot shorter. So we found that any information we can get in front of our audience, the quicker the better, so that when they do see the need, they're able to respond with a donation as soon as they can. The longer you wait, you don't know where that news media is going to move on to. So really having your message in front of people at the right moment is really critical. And I would just advise not to get caught up on having all of the perfect photos or the perfect messaging or details. You can follow up with that messaging as the situation or as the need grows, but just having something in front of your audience is really important.
So I'm curious, Melissa, do you segment your messaging per your audience, whether it's generational or first-time donors versus repeat donors?
Yeah, so we usually do our segmentation based on giving level, right? So our major donors are going to have the outreach of a staff person having that one-on-one outreach to them. Also, the advantage of that, whether that's an individual or a corporation, they'll have an understanding of, this person, their family is going to be impacted by this disaster. They have employees in the affected area, so you can really tailor that message. For our wider audience, we are always aware of where people are located. So if they are in the area that's going to be hit by the storm, we always want to lead with information that is helpful to them and to really make sure that they have the information and the resources that they need and that they're safe in the area.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And then also recognizing too that people are based across the US. Recently, we had a donor story from Hurricane Ian, who her parents, they were located in Florida, but she was in Montana. And so she wasn't able to get there in time to help, but she knew the Red Cross was there and helping her parents. And she was really appreciative of that. So having those resources available is really important.
That's interesting. Michelle, I have a question for you as it relates to GoFundMe. Was the response that you saw for giving to Ukrainian relief, was that really the first time where you saw a good chunk of the participants on that platform all kind of rally around one umbrella issue? Or is that something that has been kind of baked into GoFundMe since the beginning?
Yeah, no, gosh, that was not the first time. I think there's been a lot of those sort of groundswell campaigns that take off and have resulted in, huge droves of people coming out and giving financial support. And if it's okay, I wanted to piggyback a little bit off of some of the things Melissa said, if that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
I loved everything that she said. I wanted to call out specifically this idea around your organization taking much more of a proactive approach rather than reactive. Like, we know it's not a matter of if, it's when. And so what can you start to put in place now to be able to be more opportunistic, for lack of a better word, when some of these things happen? So can you set up campaigns that you can quickly pull the lever on, or flip a switch to turn them live, knowing that, something might happen that's adjacent to your mission? And I think what Melissa said is so true, is the data is telling us that younger donors don't even want to see really well scripted, well edited videos. They prefer much more authentic, organic type videos, messaging, communication. So don't get caught up in like, I need to edit this 17 times before I can get it out. More authentic and transparent, the better. And then a couple other things I just wanted to call out, because I think this is such an interesting topic, is if your organization's mission is adjacent to whatever timely event is happening, this is absolutely an opportunity for you to drive more funding to your mission. But I also think there are creative ways for your organization to stay at the forefront, even if whatever's happening doesn't necessarily have anything to do with your organization. And I experienced this personally. So when I was at a children's hospital in Miami, when the Haiti earthquake happened, nothing to do with us. People struggled with being sensitive around, do we continue to ask for donations? Do we pause? Because we were getting ready to launch an ask or a campaign or a call to action. What we did is we pivoted and said, if you're devastated like us, our organization is serving as a collection point for canned goods and clothes, et cetera. We're partnering with this local nonprofit in Miami who is, directly helping the people of Haiti. So your donors, especially your longtime supporters, are going to look to you to have a point of view about these things happening in the news. So how can you sort of be that conduit and convener and provide opportunities for your donors to understand how they may help another cause or thing happening where they feel like they want to activate? So I think there are also creative ways for you to still have some sort of voice and help others. And donors love to see nonprofits, pulling together and all trying to back whatever is happening rather than competing with one another.
Hi, this is Curtis Schmidt, producer of the Nonprofit Fundraising Exchange. If you're a nonprofit professional who has questions about your program, or maybe you feel like you've taken your advocacy, fundraising, or membership effort as far as you can and you need some fresh ideas, then we have a special offer for you today. NPFX podcast listeners can get a free 30-minute consultation with IPM Advancement, no strings attached, when you go to ipmadvancement.com/free. Just enter a few details and an IPM team member will contact you to follow up. It's that easy. That website again is ipmadvancement.com/free. Thanks for listening, and we hope to talk to you soon. Now let's return to the episode.
Before we talk about sustaining donor attention after that first gift, let's give listeners some background. Why is it challenging then to sustain donor attention in rapid response situations? And Michelle, I'm going to go back to you on this one.
Sure. I think it's a little bit of what I alluded to in the beginning of the conversation, is there's so much competition out there. In the US alone, I think there's approaching 2 million nonprofits. I think it's 1.8 or 1.9 million nonprofits. So it's a very crowded market. Lots of noise, limited resources. And just to add to that, people have shorter attention spans than ever. So I think in times of crisis, and generally speaking, it's not just the nonprofits that are competing for a share of voice. There has also been this huge surge of for-profit companies donating a percentage of profits, taking on social impact causes, this idea of corporate social responsibility. And then you have platforms like GoFundMe, where individuals are raising money for acute needs. So you've got all these stakeholders sort of contributing to this giving noise. And then I think another piece of it is, the elephant in the room. I think donor trust is a challenge. All you have to do is look at how often donors give a second gift. And you can look at retention rates are really, really poor for this industry. And I read recently there was a research done by the Edelman Trust Barometer, and trust in nonprofits has fallen below 50% for the first time in history. So I think you have to be transparent with where your donations are going. That transparency builds trust. And I think, in a time of crisis, you've got to find a way to share the good work that you're doing and keep that at the forefront of a conversation.
Melissa, what challenges do you run into specifically with the American Red Cross?
Yeah, it's a great question. So a lot of times we find the news, the interest, the buzz around a disaster response or any emergency, it fades before the response is over. Just for example, the tornadoes that hit the Midwest not even 2 weeks ago, that's fully old news to the media, whereas there's families still in the Midwest who they don't have a home anymore, and they're going to be dealing with that and recovering for the next year or however long. And so not only telling the long-term recovery story is one of our challenges, but also there's an increased frequency of disasters happening. And so just coming back again and again with, there's another one coming, we need your help again. Really balancing that donor, we call it donor fatigue, right? And again, it's not just our organization, as you mentioned, that's asking. There's things happening across the country, around the world, and it can be a little bit hard, I think, on people. I think they call it doom scrolling, right?
Right.
Yeah.
All of the bad news, and there's so many needs. And so I think definitely captivating people where they do have the interest, and also making that case for year-round support. It's always leading to with hope, and this is how you can help and how you can make a difference. I think is really important, because although there's definitely a great need, we see time and again that the American public is great responders and generous people.
Do the tools you use to manage your fundraising communications are they sophisticated enough to allow you to go back to someone and say, you gave to support these tornado relief efforts, and, say, like, I don't know, 6 months down the road, you're able to just give those people an update? Or do you generally have to do it kind of globally to your whole audience?
Yeah, that's a really great point. And I would actually include that when you are thinking of your communications around these emergencies or crises, that you're thinking 6 months, 1 year down the road, what information are you going to be collecting and presenting to your donors as updates is really important. So we do some segmented communications to people who made a donation directly to that response. And then we also just have that information readily available on our website as well.
I would just add, I think one opportunity that maybe more traditional nonprofits have, like an American Red Cross, where maybe some of these more crowdfunding sites like a GoFundMe can't do this, is the GoFundMe campaigns are not built to have the chance or need to really build a long-term relationship. So once a person's house is built, or their ailment has been cured, or whatever it is, the supporter sort of moves on and goes back to being that neighbor, friend, colleague, whatever. So I think that, to Melissa's point, like, the more that you can think future, like, how am I going to thank this person in a meaningful way? How do they like to be thanked? What type of communication do they like to receive? Do they like texts? Maybe they're a younger generation and they like more. We found in our surveys that younger folks like to hear from the nonprofit much more often, but of course in shorter snippets, think like Twitter, versus like baby boomers want longer, more comprehensive type updates and communication, but not as frequently. So I think it's like meeting your donors where they are is going to be really, really important as you start to try to build out that relationship. But everywhere I've ever worked, I've been lucky enough to have the level of sophistication in the tools where you could tag a donor specific to a campaign or something that happened. And then you can circle back and say, like, this person might be more likely to give or develop a certain cultivation or stewardship strategy that's particular to that segment of donor.
Michelle, I'm curious, do you have an example of a campaign that worked, and maybe even one that didn't work, of how we maintain donors' attention after they made an initial gift?
Sure. The example that comes to mind, I think it will be helpful to the listeners, because I imagine many are dealing with the same challenge of like this surge in support around COVID-19. And now how do you maintain that level of support? So the one I'm thinking of is an organization called Feeding San Diego. And they created a handful of fundraising campaigns in response to COVID-19. And their response was incredible. I think they had like almost 800% year over year increases in their online giving. And then it becomes, how do we sustain this? So post that, they were able to launch a variety of campaigns, which did a really good job of turning that ongoing support into more of that recurring giving. So you helped this one time because there was this food insecurity in your zip code in San Diego, but here's why it's important to continue to support Feeding San Diego. And here's why it's so important to be a recurring donor. So I think they did a good job of articulating why ongoing support was needed for their organization beyond the pandemic. And their growth continues today. So they've continued to improve the giving experience for their donors. And again, I think they've done a good job of meeting donors where they are. So your younger donors may want more payment flexibility to be a recurring donor. So they may want a $5 option to give monthly. So what I counsel a lot of our nonprofit partners is, if you're giving button on your page, if the amount, the initial threshold of giving is too high, you could be turning off a lot of your Gen Z younger donors. And by too high, I might mean $25. Mm-hmm. So taking a look at having those flexible payment options. Do you offer digital wallet, or is the only way to give a credit card? Because guess what? If it's a credit card, they're not going to convert. People are not going to get up and go find their credit card. Right. So I think it's, the ease of giving, is it mobile optimized? All of those things are going to be really important. But this particular organization was able to take this big influx of donors during the pandemic and start to really share that impact and do a good job articulating why this ongoing recurring income is so important to the sustainability and the mission delivery.
Melissa, do you ever give your donors an opportunity to share their stories about why they're giving?
Yeah, so recently we actually did an email series that had a section for someone to share their Red Cross story, and the responses were amazing. I mean, it makes me realize why I do my job that I do. Mm-hmm. Just because you hear the stories from the people who are impacted by the mission, or how they started to give to the Red Cross. And I think having that open line of communication with your donors and having the space for them to respond to you, whether that's a survey or just a simple form like that, especially if you're a larger organization, I think it makes it a lot more personal to them. And then after we did that email, we did a share back of, here were some of the responses too.
Nice.
I completely agree. I was at the American Heart Association for a while, and a best practice, which I reflect back now and think was just so cool, and all organizations should think about this, is we always had to put a volunteer or a donor or someone directly impacted by our work in the spotlight. I mean, we rarely as staff were allowed to really be that like figurehead, Mm-hmm. So we always put whoever we helped first. So I think people give to people. They want to hear from those that you're helping, not, an executive or a chief development officer. Yeah. And then I think another thing that Melissa said that's so important, and I don't think happens nearly enough, is like this idea of having a postmortem after a campaign, whether it was wildly successful or if it really fell flat, is going back and saying like, okay, what worked? What happened that we didn't expect to happen? What can we learn from this? I think we're just so under-resourced and we're moving so fast that we don't take the time to do that. And I just see the same mistakes happening over and over again. I worked for an organization where we did a direct mail campaign like 6 times in a row. and it never was successful. And no one ever said, like, why isn't this working?
Yeah.
So I can't call that out enough, because I just don't think that happens very often.
Yeah, and especially when, as nonprofits, we have limited resources, you have to test things and you want to make sure you're being as effective as possible.
Yeah.
I would caution against like trying something that's trendy or that you saw another organization go viral with.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, you might get supporters from that, but you really have to look at what their retention is.
Yeah.
And where's that relationship going to go down the line?
Yeah. Are you always going to be chasing after those folks to keep them engaged?
Yeah.
This has been a great segue to the last part of our conversation, where we want to talk about some recommendations. So I'd like to ask each of you, what should nonprofits do to help keep supporters engaged beyond that initial response? What would your recommendations be? Melissa, let's start with you.
Thanks so much, Russ. I know, I can't believe we've already been talking for this long. It's so great. I feel like I've learned a lot just in this conversation too. I think a big takeaway is definitely thank your donors first and foremost. Thank them, show them the impact, and then also engage with them beyond the rapid response fundraising, whether that's inviting them to get involved with your organization in a non-financial way. So if you have a volunteer opportunity or a donate a physical items drive, for Red Cross, we have people who donate blood or volunteer. So there's lots of different ways that people can get involved and give back. And we found that even in these non-financial ways, people are increasing their relationship and deepening their relationship with the organization. And so that when there is a time when you have another rapid response or there is an urgent need, they're more likely to say yes, even if they already are giving again to your organization. They'll actually make an additional donation.
Great. And Michelle, what would your recommendations and takeaways be for people listening to this conversation?
Yeah, I don't know if I would have much more to add to what Melissa said, but I think it really comes down to like changing your mindset from this one moment in time to what does that constituent journey look like? What does that donor journey look like? And again, it goes back to like being proactive and strategic and planning for it rather than being reactive to some of this episodic type giving. So, thinking about, okay, if this type of generation really shows up in a big way to this type of campaign, this is how we're going to thank them, or this is how further engagement 3 months down the line is going to look for this group of donors, or just thinking through like how to connect the dots. It just comes down to like creating those meaningful connections with supporters and being really thoughtful about that every step of the way.
Absolutely.
Great.
Yeah. And I think to add to that too, it seems to me that there's a very donor-centric way that you can look at all this, right? How do I want to be treated as someone who's engaging with this organization? What do I need to know? What do I want to know? What should I know in moving forward with this relationship over time?
Wow, this has been a great conversation. Melissa, Michelle, you've been so generous with your time today. Thank you for being on the show. Where can listeners find out more about you and the work that you do? Michelle, let's start with you.
I'm always on LinkedIn. I try to really share content and engage with other nonprofit leaders and just thoughtful people on LinkedIn. And then, of course, classy.org is awesome. There's so many free resources around building campaigns, toolkits, surveys, studies, all sorts of things, and really beyond just online fundraising. I mean, resources you could utilize for every part of fundraising. So I would say LinkedIn and classy.org.
Nice.
Great.
But thank you both so much for having me. This was really, really fun.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure to have you on the show. Melissa.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. You can go to redcross.org. There you'll find information about our programs if you want to donate blood or sign up to become a volunteer.
Wonderful.
Thank you. Michelle Boggs, Melissa Rutan, thank you for being on the show. We want to thank Curtis Schmidt, our producer, Russ Fanoff,
Rich Frazier.
As Steven Tyler says, every moment spent with you is a moment I treasure.
Oh, wow. That's nice.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah.
I didn't make it up. And to you, our listeners, thank you for joining us. We'll see you next time on the Nonprofit Fundraising Exchange.
Thanks, everybody.
That concludes this episode of the Nonprofit Fundraising Exchange. Thanks to our panel for sharing their insights and expertise. If you'd like to learn more about our panel members or any of the organizations or resources featured in this episode, we will include links in the show notes. If you like this podcast, we would love your help spreading the word. First, please subscribe in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, or your favorite podcast app, so you always know when a new episode is released. Second, forward the episodes you like to friends and colleagues, or share them on social media. Word of mouth is one of the best ways you can help us reach more nonprofit professionals like yourself. And if you use Apple Podcasts or Audible, please leave us a review. Positive reviews are how many listeners decide whether or not to try out a new podcast. We appreciate your help. For suggestions on topics, guests, or nonprofit organizations you'd like to hear on the podcast, send an email with the subject heading NPFX suggestion to contact@ipmadvancement.com. For back episodes and more resources like white papers, infographics, and blog articles, please visit the free IPM Advancement Nonprofit Resource Library at ipmadvancement.com/resources. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.